and how you frame the way you say things, telling yourself what you want to happen versus telling yourself what you don't want to happen, and having just an aggressive mindset. And that was a big part for me, was the positive self-talk. I tried to always have my last thought be what I wanted to happen. I wanted it to be an action thought, an aggressive thought, whether it was aggressive fastball inside or attack the glove, something positive. All right, welcome to another episode of the Mound Visit podcast. Today, we're going to dive into mental performance, but we're going to take a little bit of a different approach to it. When you think of mental performance, usually you're thinking about, breathing, breath work, and just things that are a little bit more standard, I guess. I can't really describe it another way. Well, maybe Josh can help me out with that. But we're going to approach this more from our own experiences. Specifically, Josh has had some really good experiences with this and has studied a lot of this, has had conversations with teammates about mental performance, and has been involved in multiple meetings and just situations, just being in professional baseball. Like, sports psychology is a really big thing. So we're going to talk about mental performance, but also looking at a different lens of how you can approach it and how you can use it to your advantage. So Josh, I'm going to kick it off to you with wherever you want to start with this, but I think this is a really important conversation, but making it, more approachable for more players rather than just, what we have seen in the past is just maybe one approach to this. Yeah,
for sure. I think mental performance, it's pretty tough because it's not the sexy thing. It's not like throwing, it's not lifting, it's not something that you can see tangible results straight away. You can work on mental performance for years and years, and you don't know if you actually go better or not. And so that's part of the difficulty with mental performance. But yeah, I'm pretty passionate about it because just throughout my career, that was my issue, was that the mental side was holding me back. So when I signed, I was 18 and I was up to 96 and I had nasty stuff, but I couldn't compete because I had the yips, and the yips are completely mostly a mental thing. It can be a physical thing sometimes, but most of the time it's pretty mental. And so once I got the yips, fought through it, got over it, but I continued to struggle with the mental game. And I feel like that was something that really held me back throughout my career. And so, I'm passionate about it. And I've done a lot of deep dives into what works. And I've talked to a lot of my teammates and coaches about what's worked. So, I'm excited to dive into this one.
Yeah, that's great. My first question would be, so you mentioned the yips, like you've dealt with, the mental side of the game or struggled through some of these areas. Would you say before you got the yips, like, was your mental game strong, or do you feel like there was always some components of it that could have been stronger?
Yeah. So I think just naturally I'm more of like a high anxiety type of guy, where it's like I'm always going to be overthinking stuff. I always got nervous and anxious before games or everything, but it was never a point where it really held me back, where I was like, damn, like my mental game is really holding me back from competing at my best. I was still able to go compete. It was like, I was dominating at that level that I was at. And so it was never a problem until I get to Pro Bowl and then I get the yips. And what the yips does is that it never goes away. You just get better at suppressing it. And so it's just a constant battle. And that's kind of what is really difficult about it, is it feels like there's like a weight on you. Every time you compete, it's like you're being held back by something, and like you're not able to compete at your highest level unless, obviously sometimes you'll like feel good and you're going to be able to compete at your highest level. But other times it just feels like there's a weight on you and you can't really compete to your best ability.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of players can relate to that. Like at some point you're probably feeling that, at least to a degree. What are some things that, traditionally speaking, either coaches or sports psychologists, like what are some of the things that are typical that they'll tell you need to do to help with this? Like what are some of the most standard approaches that people have taken with this to try to help you?
Yeah, and I want to get away from a little bit from the yips, because I know that's a really niche problem. And
I don't mean the yips necessarily, just in general. Like if you're struggling with the mental side of the game, or or not even struggling, but just like coaches, typically like to talk about the mental side. Like what are some general things that you've heard coaches or sports psych people talk to you about?
Yeah. So I think the big ones are like, I can't even remember most of them because they didn't really make an impact, to be honest. But like, breath work is a big one. Breath work, I can remember. Visualization, I can think about like, there's this thing called green light, red light. Have you heard about that?
I've heard of it, but I don't know what it is. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I don't know it in detail, but it's something about like if you're in green light, then you're feeling good. If you're in red light, then you're feeling bad. And so you want to try to get back to neutral. Some other stuff, like every mental performance coach is different and they have their own philosophies. But the thing that I kind of found was that it was really hard to implement some of these tactics. So they would talk to me about breath work. And as an 18-year-old kid, I'm like, how is breathing going to help me like go and play? Like I have no clue how this is going to help me. And like I just didn't see the correlation, like just being able to do like box breath before going out to play. I didn't see how that could really help me. And so the buy-in just wasn't there. I think, I don't want to get too deep into like if you have playing experience or not, because that's kind of like a sensitive topic. But what I did feel like really helped was when the mental performance coach had a lot of playing time in the big leagues or in the minor leagues, or just in like college or anything, because they can speak from experience. But yeah, I think that's kind of one of the things that helped. But, the other techniques I didn't really resonate with too much.
Yeah. And obviously there's certain things that, playing experience, like you said, that's a sticky conversation about playing experience. But I will say if someone hasn't been in that arena, or at least somewhere near that, to where you are feeling those types of anxieties or those fears or just the mental battles that go on with it, it can be tough to connect with a person, because they try to approach it maybe more from, I don't know if objective would be the right word, because it's not a very objective thing. But more of like, hey, you do A, B, and C, and it's going to work. It's just, that's the way it goes. It eliminates the emotional side of it that a player might have involved in the game, just with their own experiences of certain things that come up when they're in a certain situation because of past experiences or things like that. It is interesting because, like, for my own career, I felt like breathing did help me, but maybe it's because of the approach I took with it. And I was older when I started really implementing it and focusing on it. I was in my 20s towards the end of my career. Like I used Alan Jaeger. Most people know Alan Jaeger is for, his Jaeger bands, and he's a big mental side of the game component. He actually had a recording of him walking through like a breathing routine. And I would do it before games. And what I liked about it was, it wasn't even so much like the breathing that helped me. I guess it was, but that wasn't like my main takeaway. What it did for me is the approach I had was it allowed me to get in the zone. And the way I describe the zone is like just to be able to completely block out everything around me. And whenever I performed at my best, I had that feeling. I wasn't thinking about anyone in the stands. I wasn't thinking about things around me. I literally just had a dialogue going on in my own head. Like I looked like a crazy person, probably just because I was talking to myself. I would just not be really focused on anything else around me other than just attacking the hitter, usually talking smack to the hitter in my head, because that's what gave me a mental edge, was saying certain things that promoted confidence in myself and essentially degraded the hitter, because that boosted my confidence to attack and to trust my stuff. And that's what the breathing helped me with, is it just helped me focusing on the present moment and to eliminate distractions. So like box breathing and some of these other techniques, I don't know if I necessarily have done those. Mine was more of like just literally going inside and just getting purely focused on the task at hand and just getting locked into the zone.
Yeah. And yeah, to be clear, I don't want to say anything like breathing doesn't work, because especially later in my career, when I started to implement some of these techniques, it really did help me. Like there was this Andrew Huberman breathing technique. It's called the cyclic breath. It's when you take a deep breath in through your nose, and then you go one short breath in, and then you exhale really slow. But that's like an Andrew Huberman technique that's like scientifically backed to reduce stress and like reduce heart rate and stuff like that. And so I use that quite a bit. But I think just knowing the science behind it really led to a lot of buy-in. And I was like, okay, like if this is like scientifically proven, then, you know, I can be assured that it's going to work. And so, yeah, I started to implement that a little bit later in my career.
Yeah, I actually have used that technique myself. I learned about it later on in life. I mean, just a couple of years ago, I learned about it, but it works for if I'm giving a presentation, I'm speaking to a team, or I'm speaking to a group, or I'm, you know, even just doing, let's just say this, I mean, I'm not getting nervous doing this, but if there's anything that elevates my heart rate to where I feel like it's a little out of control, I'll use that exact same breathing technique. And it's amazing how well it works. Like you do that a couple times and you usually get pretty well balanced with your breath and you're able to focus. So like that is a good technique for guys that maybe their heart rate gets elevated too much and they get a little, you know, too anxious and they need to slow themselves down a little bit. That could be a really good technique. I'm curious if, I mean, I know you just said you're not a big breath person, but maybe you have a technique for this. You know, there's some players that they get too high and they need to bring themselves back down. But there's also some players in some cases where, you know, maybe it's a Sunday day game at the end of, you know, a road trip in August, and they actually need the opposite. They need to get elevated rather than get brought down. Do you have any techniques to like elevate your heart rate, or maybe not even your heart rate, but just to get you kind of woken up a little bit and locked in?
Yeah. So what I found was that when I did some research about it, if you want to calm down, then you want your exhales to be long. And so your breaths to be, but you want your exhales to be longer than your inhales. So like the cyclic breath is deep breaths in, but then it's a slow exhale. If you want to get ramped up, then it's the opposite. You want big inhales and then short exhales. So, and you do that like a couple times and you'll feel yourself like blood flowing and like, I don't know. Yeah, you can feel yourself really get going. So those are the two things that I got taught, but I never really had an issue getting up. I had to calm down. And so I've never really used it. So I'm not too sure how effective it is.
Yeah, no, I hear you. You had a tweet a few days ago, which I think was awesome. It was about mental performance. And the title of it was "Mental Performance is So Important for Athletes, Yet Many Find It Hard to Implement. Here are my thoughts and how it can make more of an impact." One of the things that you talked about, you've also talked about on, you know, this show, is the spotlight effect. And, you know, before I dive into that, and I'll have you dive into that more, is, you know, you just mentioned this a little bit ago too, how when things are scientifically backed, you know, like Andrew Huberman, people love listening to him because, well, number one, he's super knowledgeable, easy to listen to, and he's just, this is what he does for a living. He talks about things that are scientifically proven that we can apply immediately. Everything is applicable that he talks about. So for you, that's a big deal for you. That allows you to get buy-in. And the spotlight effect is one of them. Share what the spotlight effect is briefly, if you don't mind. And then is there anything else similar to that you have found that has been helpful? That's more of like a framework.
Yeah. So in the tweet, I explained that I knew there was a little bit of an issue because everyone recognizes that mental performance is super important for performance, right? Like if you ask any athlete, you're like, how important is mental performance? Everyone's going to be like, very important. And there's the famous quotes of, yeah, baseball is 90% or 99% mental. And so everyone recognizes that fact. But what I found was that and I'm not going to say like which team or whatever, but when we had a mental performance meeting once, they did the meeting, we did the meeting. And then afterwards, I asked the pitchers, like, yo, so like, how much did you really get out of that? Like, what do you think of that meeting? And a lot of them was like, I mean, it was good stuff, but like, I don't know, really, I didn't really resonate with it. Like, I don't know how to apply it to my game. And so I was like, okay, like there might be a little bit of an issue there, because, you know, if we recognize that mental performance is super important, but the athletes are having a hard time applying it, then, you know, there's a little bit of an issue there. So I was doing some research on what things actually could work. And what I found was that, you know, all these athletes, a lot of my friends and teammates, they were talking about guys like Andrew Huberman, like these scientists, like, and they're like, yeah, like this is so good. Like this mindset is awesome. David Goggins, you know. And I was like, okay, so why do they listen to them and not as much the like mental performance coaches? Like what's so compelling about their content versus the mental performance content? And what I kind of found out was, like, for example, Andrew Huberman, all of his content is scientifically backed. And so there's proof that it works. You know, the mental performance stuff, it doesn't have as much proof. And maybe it does in the background, but it's not really explained to the athletes, like, hey, if you do this, like, this is why we do it. This is the science behind it. And this is the benefit that you'll get out of it. On the other hand, Andrew Huberman, he explains that all. And so I was like, okay, like maybe we can find some ways to do mental performance where it's scientifically backed. And so I was doing research, and one of the things that I came across was the spotlight effect. And the spotlight effect is a well-researched phenomenon. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's when the brain overestimates how much people think about us. It's a phenomenon, but it's a fact about the brain. It's how the brain works. And so knowing that, you can now go in and be like, you know what, like if you were having trouble with like thinking about what other people thought about you, you can be like, you know what, like this might be this is just how my brain works, you know, and I don't have to be thinking about what other people think about me. And so when there's a science behind it, it really helps with the buy-in, and it helps with accepting that advice. Even though you might think it's true, knowing the science behind it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything. I feel like if you can prove that something works, or you have a track record of doing something that has worked, you're going to get more buy-in. That's why, historically speaking, coaches that had playing experience generally were coaches that had playing experiences. They were generally coaches because they had the experience and it was easy for players to buy in. Like I remember when I was a kid, you know, if I heard that there was a 15-year big leaguer that was going to be my coach and he wanted to give me lessons, it doesn't matter if he knows anything about pitching mechanics or what I need to improve. The fact that he played 15 years in the big leagues, I'm going to listen to this guy. Now, things have changed as time has gone on because people started to realize in certain parts of the game, and a lot of parts of the game, that the playing experience might not be necessary to teach some of the things. Now, some of the more intangibles and some of the more subjective things, that playing experience is obviously going to be super important. Like, you know, I've never been in a big league dugout, so I can't connect on what that is like exactly. I can tell you how your pitch is moving. I can tell you how you need to improve it. But some of those things that go on between the lines on a big league field, I don't have that experience. So I can't share those things. And it would be foolish to think that I am better than another coach purely because I know stuff, even though I didn't play in the big league. So I think it just going off topic a little bit, but I do think that there is a little bit of a humility aspect of knowing what your strengths are and what you can do well, and also understand what your limitations are, and not trying to be someone that you're not, or put down another coach because they play in the big leagues and and you don't think that they have the knowledge to teach. I think there's a lot of aspects of former big leaguers that they can teach that guys that didn't play in the big leagues can't. So coming full circle though, I just think the buy-in piece, like you said, it's huge. If you can connect and prove in some way that you have either you have scientific fact that it works, or you have experiences of a really long track record of doing something a certain way where you can show a list of people or things that have been done a certain way and it has gotten the positive result. That's another really good way to get buy-in. One thing, I'm looking at your tweet here. There's something I wanted to say about it. Okay, so this is what I thought was a good point, actually, that you made. So let's see what you said. Let me pull this up. It's towards the bottom of your thread. I saw firsthand how excited players would become about science and data. We would dig into pitch metrics, percentages, biomechanics, etc. I was one of them. To be clear, mental performance helped me in my career, but incorporating mental models was what made everything click. And then before that, you said, you might think that this is too much information for an athlete. Yes, it will be for some, but for others, it'll be exciting. Coming back to, we're getting into the weeds and other things. Like players know so much about their data, about how their pitches move, their mechanics, all those things. You know, just because this is new, you know, what you're talking about, some of these mental models and this different approach, just because it's new and it might take a little bit of an adjustment period, doesn't mean that it can't be a really, really valuable resource for players. It's just going to take a little bit of an adjustment period, but the ones that are interested in it and they're going to get buy-in from it, it's worth going down that path if it means you're going to elevate your mental game. Do you have any more thoughts on that? I just thought that was a really cool part of your tweet.
Yeah, I think when I talk to some people about it, the common pushback is, hey, like mental performance is supposed to be simple because we don't want our athletes thinking about stuff out there. But, you know, like, as I said, we talk about, you know, pitch metrics. We talk about biomechanics, like every single part of our mechanics, like angles of our lead leg or like back leg or whatever. Like we talk about that stuff. So I feel like it's not too much information. And what I found was that once you just know the information, you don't have to memorize it or anything. As soon as you're just exposed to it, then the buy-in goes up just because you know that there's something deeper. With some of the other stuff, you're not told anything like deep or like the science behind it or anything like that. So it feels very surface level. It feels a little bit more like a prescription instead of like a mindset change. But yes, if just knowing the depth behind it really helps with accepting the advice and just taking that.
Yeah, I want to play devil's advocate a little bit. Not devil's advocate, but just prod a little bit. So let's just say I'm using some of these mental models. I'm, you know, scientifically backed stuff. It's like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. The spotlight effect. Awesome. That makes perfect sense. But I get on the mound and those feelings, those thoughts, they come back. And even though you can tell me, oh, this is scientifically backed, like this is certain things happening in the brain, but that doesn't change the way I'm feeling. So like, how do I apply some of these mental models? Like, let's just use a spotlight effect since we've already talked about that. Like, how can I actually apply that and actually believe it when it matters most, which is when I'm feeling these anxious moments and I'm on the mound?
Yeah, that's a good one. So what I did was I came up with a cue that I thought about a lot, that kind of just incorporated the spotlight effect. So my cue was effort. So I was like, you know, that's my cue. And, you know, that might sound simple, but under it, I thought about, you know, spotlight effect. Like no one's thinking about me. Like, why do I get scared? Is because I feel like everyone's watching me. And like, I've already thought about all of those things and it's kind of just condensed into one cue, which was effort. And so when I'm competing and when I start to feel those things, I told myself like, hey, let's go, effort. And it really did help the mental side, where it's like, it kind of just reminded me of that, even though I'm not thinking directly about the spotlight effect, because I have that cue that I had already thought through. When I told myself that, it had that effect.
Yeah, so it's like you're doing the studying on the back end when you're, away from the field, you're learning about these things. And then maybe you come up with a cue like that, like you said, to where you don't have to directly think about this whole thing about what the spotlight effect is, but because you already know it, now you have a cue that can maybe help with it. That makes sense. So really it's self-talk at the end of the day that you're coming back to, is telling yourself something that you believe and that you can execute. And I would say self-talk is one of the more common things that, at least me for growing up, was talked about a lot on the mental side, was positive self-talk, and how you frame the way you say things, telling yourself what you want to happen versus telling yourself what you don't want to happen, and having just an aggressive mindset. And that was a big part for me, was the positive self-talk. I tried to always have my last thought be what I wanted to happen. I wanted it to be an action thought, an aggressive thought, whether it was aggressive fastball inside or attack the glove, something positive. Would you say that's what it is essentially, is like using these mental models to create the self-talk that you need and want on the mound, or am I missing something?
No, yeah. What's interesting about these mental models is that they're pretty much the same advice as what the mental performance is. It's pretty much just like the same thing. It's just packaged in a very different way, and it has the depth behind it, and it has the proof and the science behind it. So, the spotlight effect, that's pretty much the same thing as someone telling you, hey, no one's really thinking about you. Just go out there and shove. That's pretty much the same thing as the spotlight effect. But the spotlight effect, for me, it helped me because it had that depth. It had the science behind it. But when you really think about it, it's just the same message, different packaging.
Yep, that makes sense. Which at the end of the day, like most things, it's all about how you communicate things. Like two coaches can say the exact same thing. It might one thing might resonate with you while the other one won't, even though it had the exact same core message. It's all about how it's presented and understanding which player is going to resonate with which one. Like for you, you need the scientifically backed things. You want more of the deeper concepts versus maybe another player. Maybe he does just need the first part that you said, like, hey, no one's paying attention. Who cares? Just attack the glove, go get them, be aggressive. For some players that might work. And that's where as a coach, you need to do the work to get to know your players and to know what does resonate with them. And as a player, you got to be honest with yourself. And if you actually care about taking your game to the next level and taking the mental side seriously, you need to do some self-reflection on what type of process and what type of, concepts are going to resonate with you the most.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to hit that home where it's like mental performance definitely works for a lot of players. We see it in the big leagues. Like Corbin Burns came back and just started shoving after he did a lot of work with the traditional mental performance stuff. I was just saying it for the people where mental performance doesn't really resonate. And I saw a lot of players where they had trouble resonating with the techniques and the traditional mental performance stuff. So, I was just suggesting like an alternative way that worked for me, and it might not work for you, but it's just a different way of thinking about things.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's kind of the purpose of this episode, right? Is like we wanted to dive into some different things that are kind of against the grain, what you typically hear. And it's not that those concepts don't work, it's just they don't work for everyone, and neither does the other side. But figuring out, what is the platter of options that I have as a player and which one is going to work for me the best. I kind of want to go, maybe peel back the onion, deeper a little bit and go to a different side of the coin of ultimately like the root of some of these issues that players can have. And I want to talk about confidence, because confidence is something that it's talked about a lot, right? And people talk about the importance of it. I talk about the importance of it. But what I want to ask you, this is purely your opinion on, is what do you think causes a lack of confidence? Like, do you think it has to necessarily be a trauma or something negative happen to cause it? Or do you think some people just naturally are more prone to be confident and believe in themselves while others are less likely to have that initial confidence?
Yeah, I think there are definitely people who are naturally higher in anxiety and are naturally, like a little bit more warriors. That was me. I would always like overthink stuff. I would worry a lot, and I'm just a high anxiety type person. That being said, though, I feel like, yeah, confidence. Yeah, I think the only way to lose confidence, it have to be like a bad performance or like an injury or something like that. But there was an interesting thing that one of the pitching coaches told me. He was a Japanese pitching coach, and he told me that confidence isn't necessary. You just got to go out there and do your job. And so he was like, you know what, like feeling confident is great, but a lot of the time you're not going to feel confident. And so just go out there, compete, and just do your job. And so that's kind of what I internalized, because, you know, confidence is fluctuating, and it was really hard for me to keep my confidence up, especially if I was going through a rough patch. And so that's kind of what helped me. How do you keep your confidence up, Jared?
Well, I want to ask you a question about that, and kind of just trying to read between the lines of what that guy was saying. Do you think he's basically saying confidence is an emotion, so it can change depending on how you feel that day, versus if you focus on just doing your job, it takes the emotion out of it, and it's more so just like focusing on the X, Y, and Z, like just find a way, whatever you have that day, find a way, regardless of how you feel. Is that more of what it is trying to strip the emotion out of the task?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's right. He just said, you know, like, as long as you can do your job, you'll be fine. And I think it might have been also like a distraction type thing, where it's like, you know what, even if I don't feel confident, I can just go out there and do my job and focus on my cues. He was a big cue guy. And so if you're on the mound and focusing on your cues, you're not focusing as much on your confidence. And so it could have also been a distraction type thing, but I definitely think it's just taking the emotions out, because at the end of the day, your feelings don't really matter. It's just how you compete.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. I personally believe in confidence and the importance of it, but like I understand what he's saying. Basically, don't ride the wave of the ebbs and flows and let that distract you from what is most important, which is getting guys out and just doing your job, which is one of my favorite quotes by Bill Belichick. He says that all the time. Like, that was his motto with the Patriots, was do your job. That's it. Especially when Tom Brady was there. Like, that's what they talked about with all their players. Doesn't matter how big or small it is, whatever your job is, just do it. Do your job. If you do that, everything else will take care of the rest. But going back to confidence, for me, I always felt like the environment in a way shaped my confidence, which is maybe why this is something that you shouldn't focus on, because your environment will constantly change. But I always had an adjustment period to where if I was in a new place, or on a new team, I should say, there was always a little bit of an adjustment period. And I think part of it was I was trying to prove to them that I was good enough to be on that team or to be pitching on the mound. And it just took a little bit of time to get comfortable. And then when I got comfortable, or I had a couple good outings, from there, it was like, okay, I can breathe, I can pitch. I don't have to prove myself necessarily to these guys anymore. Like in high school, beginning of high school, felt that a little bit. And then junior, senior year, clearly was doing well and didn't have to worry about that. Get to college, freshman year, first couple of weeks, definitely felt that, really struggled. Finally had a good outing, and then could breathe a little bit, and then confidence kind of kept going. Going back to what I talked about a few episodes ago with David Goggins, I use the cookie jar method a lot, of really reflecting back on what I had done in the past, and I could use that as drive and strength moving forward, knowing that I had already proven it to myself. But if I hadn't proven it to myself at that current level, then I had nothing to go off of. I had to do it. I had to just do my job. And then the confidence would come with that. And it was just level by level. That was kind of how it worked for me. I wish I could have flipped the switch a little bit earlier, because every level I went to, I struggled at first. And I hardly ever got off to a good start when I was in a new environment for the first time. That first year, at least that first couple months, it was definitely a struggle, just because I didn't feel like myself. I wasn't able to execute the way I knew how to, just because that confidence and that belief just wasn't there. And it was reflected in the way I pitched and executed my pitches. And, coming back to that, I think, some of these mental models can definitely help. Having some of these mental tools are going to be able to help. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to prove it to yourself. Once you prove it to yourself, it's going to be a lot easier to replicate it. But if you don't have anything to go off of, it's going to be tough. And it's just that's where this is just such a fun part of the game, but it's also such a frustrating part of the game, because it isn't just do A, B, and C, and you're going to get the result you want. Like, you have to do so much self-discovery on this, which is the fun part, because you're going to learn a lot about yourself if you're willing to go there. But I can't tell you, let's just say, Josh, you're on my team and I just meet you. I can't tell you, hey, do A, B, and C, and it's going to work. I can guide you. I can tell you what's worked for me. But at the end of the day, you have to do some self-discovery and figure out what is going to work for you ultimately.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was a good point. I definitely experienced that as well when I was moving up and down levels. Well, yeah, when I was transferred to a new team, whether it be affiliates or different organizations, there was definitely a transition period that I went through. And I think it's the same thing. It was just, I just wanted to prove myself and also just not look like an idiot. And so I was just guarding myself a little bit, and that probably led to a little bit of a lower confidence. But yeah, I've definitely felt that as well.
Yeah. So let's dive into, we've talked a lot about some thoughts and some ideas. Like, let's start to dive into maybe some things that players can apply, to really use some of these things. Like, what are some resources? I know you're a huge reader and you've talked about some of the books. And last week we had a resource episode. So I assume those would be some good starting points for books. But like, what are some things that we can give the listeners to that they can start applying?
Yeah, something that just came to my mind, and I should have talked about this a little bit earlier, was that with the confidence thing, it doesn't have to be just like on-field stuff. I actually think a lot of the confidence that you gain is from off-field stuff. And so like during 2020, 2021, I went through a big like self-improvement period. It's kind of like got a bad rap right now, but pretty much it's just like improving yourself in every area. And so like if you're scared about something, then you go and you do it. Like I talked about this the previous episode, but like I would just go out to the malls and just approach girls because I was scared of doing it. And so I'd go out and do it. Or like I was scared of heights, so I'd jump off like cliffs. And just starting to slowly prove to yourself that you can do things even if you're scared of doing it. That definitely builds confidence. Like reading and doing stuff that's actually productive instead of just playing games and like watching Netflix or whatever. Like that slowly builds confidence as well. There's a saying from one of my favorite creators, Sahil Bloom. He's like, there's not a single loser who wakes up in the morning at 5 a.m. and goes and works out. And so it's like just proving to yourself that you can do like badass things, and then that slowly builds your confidence. And yeah, I think that was one of the biggest things that improved my confidence, was actually improving confidence in myself, not as a baseball player, but as me, Josh Gessner, being comfortable in my skin. And so, yeah, that was one of the biggest things for me. Sorry, what was your question? I got a little bit sidetracked.
No, that was good. It's basically just, what are some things that players can do to apply this? And I think that answered it. It's like, it doesn't have to be baseball stuff necessarily. It can be just making yourself a well-rounded person and prove to yourself over and over again that you can do hard things, that you can, if something is a challenge for you, but you do it anyways, like doing that over and over again, you start to build this confidence, like you're saying, in your mind. A question I would have for you, once again, I'm going to push back because I think this is good just to keep the conversation going. Do you think that taking time away from playing games, so let's just say someone wants to train for a year, like you did this, so that's why I'm asking. I want you to tell me from your own experience. Do you think getting away from a game environment, even if maybe it is the best thing for you because you need to develop your velo and all of that, do you think that can play a factor in hurting your confidence in game settings because you're not putting yourself in game situations? You're just enclosed in an indoor facility throwing, nothing, no consequence really on the line. Like, do you think if you do that for too long of a time that it can hinder some of that confidence on the field, or you think it's just player to player dependent?
Yeah, I think it's player to player dependent for sure. You know, I've been around guys who can do that for, you know, 2-3 years and just go out and compete, and it's just no issues. I wasn't like that. I definitely had a transition period of, all right, I'm in a facility for like 6 months to a year, and then now I'm outside, like with fans and everything, and it definitely was difficult to transition. But I would say that it probably would hinder like your confidence and like the mental game a little bit if you are away from it for too long. But, you know, like if you do need to develop physically, then that's just something that you might need to do.
Yeah, it's a tough answer, because it's like, yeah, at the end of the day, okay, maybe I'm confident in myself, or maybe I'm not confident in myself anyway, because I'm not performing well and my stuff's not where it needs to be. So it's just, yeah, that fine line. And then finding ways, you know, if you are doing the training route, finding ways like you're talking about to where you can still work on the mental side of the game, even though you're not necessarily putting yourself in actual game situations, or maybe try to incorporate that into your training somehow. It's just, yeah, it's not a perfect answer, but that was just something I was thinking about, because I will say a lot of people that I know have been out of games for a while and they just train. It does seem like most of them have an adjustment period, specifically with throwing strikes. That seems to be the biggest thing, is guys just walk too many people when they're just in a training environment for too long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I definitely experienced that. I was in, when I came out of that training period, I was at Driveline for, I think, like 6 months or something. And then I was an incoming freshman. So I went and played in the West Coast League. And I played for the Victoria Harbour Cats, and I was an opening day starter. And there was probably like 6,000 to 7,000 people there. It was pretty insane. And so, yeah, you probably guess what happened. I gave up like 5 runs in like 2 innings or something, like just walking the house. And, you know, like soon after I signed, so it wasn't bad. But yeah, it's definitely tough if you're in a facility environment and you expected to go compete and throw strikes.
Yeah, I guess that's why you allow for an adjustment period, like you did. Like you went and played there, like not having yourself set up to where the first time you're in game experience is in the spring season for a really meaningful game. That probably shouldn't be the first time you're stepping foot on a field in a year. But no, this was good. Something, you know, quickly that maybe you can share. You know, you talked about these mental models, specifically talk about the spotlight effect. Like, how can people find these? Like, do you just search on Google mental models for mental performance, or like, how can people search some of these and start reading about these?
Yeah, that's a bit of a difficult one, because these mental models aren't really applied to sport yet. So these mental models are used by all like the really high performing traders, hedge fund traders, like executives, like in the business world, tech world, all these guys who like think for a living, they use these mental models. And so it isn't really applied to athletes as far as I know. But yeah, if you type into Google just mental models, then there are a ton that comes up. If you do want to look into it, look at Farnham Street. It's a blog. That's the best one for mental models. But yeah, I would say if you're an athlete, I would say self-improvement first. That's the most important. And then these mental models and mental performance are just tools to increase your performance. They're not going to fix any underlying confidence issue or like fear issue, anxiety, or anything like that. You really need to work it out on your own by, you know, really starting to dive deep into why you're scared of things or why you're anxious, or, you know, and that's the self-improvement and getting comfortable in your own skin. So I'd say self-improvement first, and then go look at mental models if the mental performance stuff isn't resonating.
Perfect. I think that's good advice. Probably the easiest thing too, if you don't want to get into the weeds on, is just follow certain accounts on Twitter that post some of these mental models, and you can just consume them purely for just personal growth. Like Sahil Bloom perfect example of someone that'd be a good follow on Twitter if you want to start diving into some of these things. But this was good. This was a really good episode.
Yeah, and follow me on Twitter because I try to apply it to athletes.
There you go. Yep. Get Gessner Josh. Well, that's in the show notes, so give Josh a follow. All right, we'll see you guys next week.
See ya.